All right, so today we're diving into a really powerful memoir from rural Algeria called Le Petit Paysan, which translates to The Little Peasant. It's the story of a boy, Slemnia Bendaoud, and how he navigated some incredible hardship to find his voice and become a writer. And his story, it all starts in a pretty unexpected place, with a pair of shoes. So this is the very first line of his book. And just think about that for a second. His entire memory, as far back as he can possibly go, doesn't start with his birth or his first word or his family. It starts with a pair of little red shoes. For him, that's where life actually began. And get this, he was only 3 years old. For Bendaoud, everything that came before that moment is just gone. It's a total blank. But those shoes, they were the first vivid thing he could hold on to. The anchor for his entire identity. Which brings us to these red shoes. Now, to really get this story, you have to understand that these weren't just something to put on your feet. No way. For this little boy, they were a massive, profound awakening. I mean, you gotta picture this. He was a shepherd, often running around barefoot. So these shoes, they were pure freedom. They protected him from all the thorns and sharp stones of the Algerian countryside. But it was even more than that. He talks about the absolute joy of stamping the sole of his shoe into the wet earth. It was the first time he could literally leave his own unique mark on the world. But almost immediately after this incredible moment of awakening, his entire world gets turned completely upside down. He's ripped away from the quiet countryside and thrown into the city. And this move creates this powerful set of contrasts that would really define his entire childhood. He was just caught between two completely different worlds. On one hand, you have the countryside. It's all about quiet, tradition, and the feeling of the earth under your bare feet. And then, bam, the city is the total opposite. It's loud, it's chaotic. It's a world of shoes, education, and what he calls this constant, overwhelming light. This wasn't just a change of scenery. It was a head-on collision of two different realities. And right at the center of this new, chaotic city life was his father. Bendaoud is just brutally honest about him. He writes, "As an authoritarian man, my father was quick to slap." So this wasn't some gentle guide into a new life. He was a disciplinarian, and his authority was this constant and often really painful presence. And this move to the city, it was also this act of profound separation. He carries this one memory with him his whole life. He says, "Coming back to myself, I remembered my mother who greeted me in secret, tears budding in her eyes. He was taken from her when he was just 5, and that secret, tearful goodbye just haunted him." So you'd think maybe school would be a refuge from all this, right? A safe place to learn? Well, no, not at all. For him, school was a brutal battleground. He had to fight for a totally new kind of existence, and the price he had to pay was incredibly high. The pressure started before he even walked through the school doors. On his very first day, his own father looks at him and says, "How dirty you are. Go wash yourself. Do you think the schoolmaster will accept monkeys like you in his class?" Can you even imagine hearing that as a little kid? The message was crystal clear. You are not good enough. And once he got inside the classroom, it didn't get any better. He describes his teacher, Monsieur Zadouk, as a figure of absolute terror. He says, when Monsieur Zadouk entered the classroom, there was complete silence. With fear in their stomachs, the students began their lessons. So this wasn't learning out of curiosity. It was learning fueled by pure, gut-wrenching fear. The pressure from the parents was just as intense. And this quote is just chilling. He writes that parents would tell the teacher they were willing to buy the shroud in case their offspring failed. So failing wasn't just getting a bad grade. In this world, the stakes were so unbelievably high that failing school was basically seen as a type of death. So when you add it all up, the scorn from his father, the terror from his teacher, and this crushing weight of parental expectation, it's really no surprise how Bendaoud remembers those school years. He boils down 1964 to 66 to just a single powerful word: l'enfer, hell. Okay, so let's pull back the lens for a moment, because what's so fascinating here is that this intensely personal story of suffering and struggle, it's all happening against the backdrop of a nation trying to find its own feet. You can see it so clearly here, how his life just maps directly onto his country's history. He starts school just a few years before Algerian independence in 1962. And then his hell years in the classroom, they line up perfectly with the difficult early years of the new nation, a time that started with so much promise but quickly turned to disillusionment. And the author remembers that right after independence, there was this incredible feeling of optimism. The country was thriving. He talked specifically about a record harvest in 62 and 63. There was this real sense that after all the struggle, a golden age was about to begin. But that hope, it faded, and fast. Bendaoud captures all that bitterness and disappointment with this just devastating line. He says, "The granary of Rome, which Algeria once was, is now begging from Europe." To see your nation go from being the breadbasket for an entire empire to a state of dependency, that national tragedy was the silent soundtrack to his own personal one. And this all leads us to the final, incredible, transformative act of his story. How does all of this, the poverty, the separation, the brutal school, the national heartbreak, how does all of that, against all odds, forge a writer? Well, his journey from a peasant boy to a poet, it wasn't a single lightning strike moment. It was this gradual transformation. It started with a shocking prophecy from his own father, got sparked by a chance discovery, and was really fueled by a desperate need to escape into a world of words, where he could finally build a new identity for himself. This is just incredible. Years later, after seeing his son's skill with language, the same authoritarian father who once called him a monkey, he delivered this stunning verdict. He said, "You are a man of the pen. Return to the pen." It was this amazing moment of recognition, a prophecy from the most unlikely person, that gave him that final push. But the other critical turning point came from a random encounter with a book by the French writer Jean Giono. Now, Giono wrote about peasants and nature with so much dignity and beauty. For Bendaoud, finding this book was a magical gesture. For the very first time, he saw his world, his people, reflected in literature, and it just lit up a whole new path for him. Ultimately, writing became his salvation. It was the one place where all the chaos of his life finally started to make sense. And he says it best himself. Literature is this virtual world where everything comes together. It opened its arms to me. I immediately threw myself, body and soul, into that world. He wasn't just writing stories. He was building a brand new world that he could actually live inside. And that kind of leaves us with a final question, doesn't it? The story of Le Petit Paysan is such a powerful reminder that our deepest experiences, even the ones that hurt the most, are the very soil from which our voices can grow. Which really makes you wonder, what stories are buried in our own pasts, just waiting for a voice?